Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us all here tonight. Going to be speaking on Bodhi and Bodhichitta. Um, I'm not going to be speaking more from a specific tradition, but more from a practical application, and almost taking the standpoint of somebody new, kind of like a child, um, coming into and just hearing about some of these things for the first time. And I based most of this presentation on the quote for the week. Through heart energy, one begins to break down the false boundary of the persona and its limited view of family and friendship. Before I begin, I'd like to offer my most sincere salutation and gratitude to those great beings, the Mahatmas, the Bodhisattvas, the great teachers of Brahmavak, throughout all of humanity's history, no matter the tradition or time. They are the exemplars of true sacrifice, the philosophy of perfection, the science of spirituality, and the religion of responsibility, without which we would not have any teachings, and the way would be darker still. They have held the torch, pure and unblemished, throughout the ages, ever offering help to any and every pilgrim soul who wishes to recover that Tat, our true inheritance and sovereignty within. The Krishna Christos, the self of all, solely for the sake of the still suffering humanity. What is Bodhi? Bodhi translates from Sanskrit as awakening, perfect knowledge. That perfect knowledge or wisdom by which a man becomes victorious, a victor, a Buddha, formed from the root verb, bud, which means to awaken, to know, to wake, to be awake, to recover consciousness, to observe, heed, attend to. Chitta translates from Sanskrit as mind, sometimes heart mind, or even state of mind, as opposed to manas, which is usually used to describe the general thinking faculty, classified throughout many systems as one of the 7 principles of man, the bridge between the lower quaternary and the higher triad. Composed together, Bodhi and Chitta bridge to translate as a wisdom-seeking mind, or the altruistic mind of enlightenment. By analogy, Bodhi is like the fully flowered tree of wisdom, and Bodhicitta as its seed. Here we can easily draw a correspondence between the macrocosm and the microcosm. The seed contains the potential of the mighty Bodhi tree. They are linked, essentially of the same kind, but only different in degree. A child who looks at the seed of a lotus and the fully blossomed flower may not make the connection between the two, though they are inherently linked in essence. The lotus would not be without the seed. When we think of wisdom, the question might arise, what is wisdom, and why would I want to be wise? Is there something more to life than waking up, going to school or work, coming home, going to sleep, only to repeat it ad nauseam? Does anyone know, truly know? And if there are beings that know, who are they? Where can I find them? How can I become like them? And what do they have to teach? How do I cultivate a wisdom-seeking mind? Such questions might arise at some point within the soul's consciousness. usually after some kind of suffering, some kind of shock in the pilgrimage of incarnated existence. These are the questions of children, or beings of a childlike nature. These basic questions presuppose humility, that one does not know. Not only that one does not know, but that one seeks to know. This initial stage cannot be overlooked. In the voice of the silence, it states, the pupil must regain the child state he has lost, ere the first sound can fall upon his ear. According to the wise in the voice of the silence, it appears that we have lost something incredibly important, the child state. What does this mean? It does not take long to observe, if one has the privilege to be in the company of a child, that something magical is present. Yes, children are prone to temper tantrums. They don't seem to know anything at all. They pester us with incessant questions about simple things. They can barely speak properly, and they have no idea how to take care of themselves. But I suppose all of this can be said about adults as well. Now, something really important has been looked over in the transition between childhood and adulthood. Something has been lost. Children, especially under the age of 5, are naturally open and receptive. They are not filled up with ideas and mental boxes, which permeate our civilized societies. They don't know anything, and thus they're true learners. They can actually be taught. Children have no idea about what the world is. They don't know that we aren't supposed to love certain kinds of people. We have to teach them that people of different skin colors, countries, or of different cultures or economical backgrounds are not part of the people that we love. No, sweetie, don't go near that dirty man on the side of the street. He doesn't work and just wants our money. He doesn't deserve it, and he might hurt you. Most young children have no idea about war, why adults might condone a war of slaughter against our fellow humanity under the guise of protecting another group more deserving of it. Most children cannot stand the news. It is almost as though they are naturally repulsed by the vibration coming out of the speakers. They don't know that Republicans are ignorant, selfish, Nazis who are just misinformed, uneducated, and misguided. Or that Democrats are spoon-fed, robotic communists who just eat too much tofu and are easily convinced of any narrative provided by their government. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. Thus say the pundits, who are always ready to reinforce our hatred and fear of one another, and to provide us with a convenient narrative of what is really going on in the world. It is pitiful, and sadly, we believe them. We believe that this side is the right side, and the other is misguided, misinformed. Perhaps we are all misguided and misinformed. The only thing that is dangerous is our utter lack of responsibility to our immortal soul, the Krishna Christos within. Quote, man, physically, is a compound of all the kingdoms, and spiritually, his individuality is no worse for being shut up within the casing of an ant than it is for being inside of a king. It is not the outward or physical shape that dishonors and pollutes the 5 principles, but the mental perversity. Then it is but at his 4th round, when arrived at the full possession of his kama energy and completely matured, that man becomes fully responsible. As at the 6th, he may become a Buddha. and at the seventh, before the pralaya, Adayan Chohan. From Mahatma M. What does this tell us? That it is through our mental perversity, our thoughts, our mental constructions and beliefs, which lies all evil and limitation in the world. Does this mean that evil has no apparent reality outside of the mind? It is only our thoughts. If someone is serious about generating a wisdom-seeking mind, about cultivating bodhicitta, what does this mean? If all our limitation only exists in the mind, what would it mean to purify it? Does my own mental perversity and suffering have any relationship to the suffering of others? And if I have lost something sacred and precious through my own choices, how do I regain the child state I have lost? We are lucky here in America because what we are conditioned to become is so ridiculous that in a sense, it is easier to turn away from it. The great teachers of mankind have all taught love and compassion as the law of laws, the heart doctrine. But it is the heart through the mind. The real battlefield is not anywhere in the world. In fact, it isn't external in any shape or form. It is within the mind. It is our choice to fill the mind with evil and limiting thoughts, which constrict and narrow our vision, or with noetic, universal ideas that expand our horizon and can draw a larger circle with our identity and interaction with other souls on these planes of manifestation. Essentially, it is a question of devotion. Do we devote our mind to dreaming or brooding? Do we cultivate a wisdom-seeking mind or a brooding slave mind? And what is our motive behind doing it? And further still, can I take responsibility for the evil I recognize as existing in myself? That every failure I see in the world is my failure. This is a quote from Raghavan Iyer's article on integration and recurrence. Quote, most human beings are unable to maximize their opportunities, even under the lesser, though still vast, sum totals and karmic curves of individual monadic existence, prefigured by the Mangalottarika star. They die hardly having used 1% of their potential brain power, and hardly having tapped 1/10 of 1% of their far more powerful heart energy. If the spiritual and mystical heart is not exercised, it begins to atrophy. If, however, it is strengthened through the exercise of dispassion and devotion, it gains strength, firing the synapses of the nervous system and stimulating the cells in the centers of the brain. Through heart energy, through an abundant love of one's fellow men, of their children and their families, one begins to break down the false boundary of the persona and its limited view of family and friendship. As this barrier is dissolved, other human beings and the world at large seem less alien, less hostile. Life becomes more meaningful and challenging through the perception that all other human beings are immortal souls, like oneself, capable of reciprocity and spiritual aspiration. One can tap more and more of one's heart energy and thus quicken the Buddhic mind and even release the spiritual will. End quote. H.P. Blavatsky wrote that chitti is the inner voice in man. Chitti, when developed, is the quality of manas in conjunction with buddhi. It is curious that the planet Mercury, also called Hermes, exoterically symbolizes manas, or the mind, but esoterically symbolizes Buddhi, the vehicle which reflects the pure, colorless light of the Atman, Krishna, Christos, true wisdom, compassion. But that light must descend into the arena of the mind in order to be used for the benefit of all. That light is pure, changeless, eternal, and does not need anything and wants nothing. If our mind can become porous, that light can descend and illumine the mind. Buddhi, manas, taijasi, brilliance, a child state, analogous to the golden age. It is said we've all participated in 18.75 million years ago at the lighting up of manas in the third root race. Thus, it is meditation before brotherhood, not brotherhood before meditation. That light, that heart energy, can dissolve all of our mental barriers between our fellow humanity. In Plato's allegory of the cave, humanity is depicted as being enslaved, mistaking shadows for reality. The chains around their neck are loose and remain there by choice. The prisoners could remove the chains at any time, turn around and see how they've been living in ignorance. Eventually, they could make it out of the cave entirely, see the truth, and unite permanently with the divine. There are beings who have done this, it is said. However, there are also beings who have realized the truth, but have stopped and moved through the thought of all the other beings, still suffering inside the cave, have chosen to renounce this bliss, nirvana, and re-enter the cave for the sake of all the struggling pilgrims who still mistake shadows for reality, who do not know of their inheritance, their inner ruler. It is because of beings like these that we have any idea of how to transcend our own enslavement. Courageous souls who have chosen to continue to be bound in order to help all other beings towards true spiritual freedom. An 8th century Buddhist monk named Shantideva was one of those courageous souls. Shantideva puts this profound impulse of renunciation in the form of an ordination. When the Sugatas of former times committed themselves to the Bodhichitta, they gradually established themselves in the practice of a bodhisattva. So, I too commit myself to the Bodhichitta for the welfare of all beings, and will gradually establish myself in the practice of a bodhisattva. Today, my birth has become fruitful. My birth as a human being is justified. Today, I am born in the Buddha family. I am now a son of the Buddha. Now I am determined to perform those acts appropriate to my family. I will not violate the purity of this faultless, noble family. Such an ordination like this from Shantideva, or the Pledge of Kuan Yin, it's like a marker. It's an incredible sacrifice, taken on behalf of the whole, forever and everywhere. It is an affirmation taken to one's higher self that is essentially unfulfillable. It is choosing to be reborn again and again, choosing to be bound in a limiting form and involved in all the suffering of mankind. Bodhicitta is like the seed of an essential difference between the saint and the adept, between the eye doctrine and the heart doctrine. The adept chooses to be bound in order to help free others, and by doing so, is choosing to be involved in the light as well as the dark sides of existence. To practice compassion is not to abandon the toils of existence. You see, when we move through the darkness within ourselves, by going through suffering, we know it. We become familiar with the forces involved in overcoming it, and are thus in a real position to help someone else who may be struggling as we did. This may seem daunting. How can I, who am still bound by my lower nature, have any hope to help free others from the bonds of conditioned existence? If the end is in the beginning, the tree or flower is potentially contained within the seed. Is this not the same with wisdom? Elton Hall, in his article on Shantideva, says this, quote, "Bodhichitta contains the potency necessary for the entire pilgrimage to enlightenment, and it is the womb of karuna, compassion. With it, goodness can vanquish evil, knowledge can surmount ignorance, and insight can subdue suffering. The arising of bodhicitta completes one's birth as a human being, where one becomes a Buddha Putra, a Buddha son, and member of the Buddha Kula, the Buddha family." End quote. This shows quite a different rate of vibration to what it means to generate a wisdom-seeking mind. It also gives a different coloring to the whole effort one makes when the motive from the very beginning is for the whole. This means that when one is moving through life, attempting to learn, that there is a different kind of purpose in mind, a kind of backdrop through which a person moves. Even though progress may be slow, drop by drop, even though one is likely to fail in one's efforts, every little drop counts. This is a longer quotation from Raghavan Iyer's article on integration and recurrence. Anyone who can, as a result of deep meditation, start with small beginnings and try to utter a word to help or heal another human being, or who can stay in a period of silence for the sake of some larger purpose of benefit to humanity, can come to know what it is to initiate. To gain the power of the initiator, one must both specialize and concentrate magnetism and be attentive enough to apply a thought with such controlled precision and perfect timing to the needs of another human being that one can make a permanent change for the good in that person's life. In the light of wisdom sacrifice, jnana yajna, good and bad are merely relative appellations from the standpoint of differentiated consciousness in time and space. We grow over a lifetime in making finer and finer discriminations, because the cruder relativities with which we live prevent us from understanding a great deal of human life. If this is true of the world around us, it is also true of ourselves. This has been put in the form of a story about the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, all of whom are compared to impostors who accost a man in the jungle. We are told that tamas is the one who assaults the victim for the immediate purpose of robbery. Rajas is the one who binds him up for the purpose of making the proper kill. And sattva is the one who releases the person, can take him to the edge of the forest, but cannot go any further. Sattva is afraid of what is outside the forest. He is also a thief. But his theft is through goodness. It is an attempted theft of that illimitable light of the spirit which can never be captured or translated into attributes. A person may see all his limitations and weaknesses as shadows of certain qualities which are the painstaking results of karmic good works in previous lives, but which are still bonds because they become ways in which one defines oneself. Sattva involves one as a personal image, a personal self in imagining that one is better than others, in imagining that one is separate from the beast and the most wretched. It is also fundamentally unable to rise to the level of compassion of Krishna, who can see in all the same diffused light throughout the great masquerade of Maya, but who also perceives the many degrees of enslavement to the masquerade, which can only be overcome during a long period of time. We must not be caught up in all this, because this very framework that binds, because this is the very framework that binds, especially when it is cloaked in one's better qualities. The light of the Prajnagarbha, the Atman beyond and above all the gunas and qualities, is a wisdom that is essentially unmanifest and is in perpetual motion, which is pure, motionless self-existence. This is quite a profound perspective. To see even one's own perception of their own goodness as a barrier. If I see myself as a good person, doesn't that then create an opposition of something called a bad person, which is opposed to myself? When we see limitation in the world, like seeing a heroin addict on the street, how many of us think back to when we ourselves were in pain, refusing to learn, and instead chose to torture the Christos within, even in small, little ways? How many of us, when we witness mass murders on the news, look back to when we chose to kill a simple ant, or through our mind, nurtured terrible hatred towards another? To think in this way is to insert oneself into the whole, to know that one is actually no different than anyone else in reality, that one's frailties exist in all, just as one's sage-like qualities do. Just like Krishna says in the Mahabharata, act, but don't reflect on the fruits of the acts. Forget desire, seek detachment. Renunciation is not enough. You must not withdraw into solitude. You must not stay without action, for we are here to serve the world. You must learn to see with the same eye a mound of earth and a heap of gold, a cow and a sage, a dog and the man who eats the dog. The mind is greater than the senses. Above the mind there is pure intelligence, freed from thought. Beyond pure intelligence, there is being, universal being. This is a high state, indeed. And what does it matter if one falls short in one's ability to live up to such an ideal? As long as one continues to try wholeheartedly, then there are no such failures. This is also from another article from Hermes. We need to say to the personal conditioned self, even though that you are incapable of appreciating the grandeur of the cosmic sacrifice, I, that self which knows that you are incapable, take you and throw you into the cosmic fire. And in Raghavan Iyer's article on the Kuan Yin Pledge, the Kuan Yin Pledge is a bodhisattvic vow taken on behalf of all living beings. It is closely connected with the Bodhichitta, wisdom-seeking mind, the seed of enlightenment. The idea that an unenlightened human being can effectively generate a seed of enlightenment is the central assumption behind the compassionate teaching of Mahatmas and Bodhisattvas, of the Buddhas and Christs. A drop of water is suggestive of an ocean, A flashing spark or single flame is analogous to an ocean of light. The minuscule mirrors the large. Herein lies the hidden strength of the Kuan Yin pledge. What may seem small from the standpoint of the personal self, when it is genuinely offered on behalf of the limitless universe of living beings and of all humanity past, present, and future, can truly negate the finality of finitude, the ultimacy of what seems urgent, the immensity of what appears immediate. I'd like to end with a reading from The Jewel in the Lotus. This is from Shantideva, called Bodhichitta. Let others do whatever gives them some true joy, but may I never bring misfortune upon them, because they relied upon me. Whether their opinion of me is harsh or pleasant, may it be their steadfast way of fulfilling every aim completely. Should some wrong me, accuse me falsely, mock me, or do some other deed, may they all still share enlightenment. I would be a protector for those without protection, a guide for those who journey, a boat, a bridge, and a passage for those who desire to pass to the other shore. May I be a light for those who wish a light, a bed for those who desire a bed, and a slave for those who need a slave. May I be a magic jewel, a jar which cannot be drained, a mighty mantram, a true panacea, a wishing tree, and a cow of plenty for all creatures. Just as the earth, the other three elements, and space eternally nourish and sustain all beings, so may I become that source of nourishment and sustenance which maintains all beings situated throughout space, so long as all have not attained to peace. When the Sugatas of former times committed themselves to the Bodhichitta, they gradually established themselves in the practice of a Bodhisattva. So too, I commit myself to the Bodhichitta for the welfare of all beings, and will gradually establish myself in the practice of a Bodhisattva. Today, my birth has become fruitful. My birth as a human being is justified. Today, I am born in the Buddha family. I am now a son of the Buddha. Now I am determined to perform those acts appropriate to my family. I will not violate the purity of this faultless and noble family. Even as a blind man may find a gem in a heap of dust, so have I found bodhicitta within myself. The bodhicitta elixir emerged to destroy death in the world. It is the imperishable treasure which removes the world's poverty. Bodhicitta is the complete medicine, the cure for the world's disease. It is a tree giving refuge to wayfarers on life's journey. Bodhicitta is the universal bridge in crossing over obstructions. Bodhicitta is the risen moon of the mind, cooling the hot passions of the world. Bodhicitta is the great sun which dispels the darkness of the world's ignorance. Like sweet butter, it rises from the churning of the milk of Bodhidharma. For the caravan of humanity traveling the road of being and hungering for true happiness, bodhicitta is the ambrosia of bliss, regenerating all those who share in it. I invite the world to the enlightenment of the Buddhas, and thereby to true happiness. May gods, asuras, and all sentient beings rejoice in the presence of the protectors. Thank you for listening.
Wow, Michelle. That's my whole analysis right there as well. she is here. We've got another half an hour here to entertain conversation, or just sit here and be quiet together. But if anybody would like to put their hand up, then go for it. Monica. I think Monica put her hand up manually, and then after that, Judy.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Oh, okay. Should I go?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Michelle, exquisite, just exquisite. One long, deep, joyous meditation. It was just beautiful. I have one thing that I thought was incredibly important because I don't know if I've ever heard it before. Sattva, imagining one is separate, better than, to even see one's own perception of his or her own goodness as a barrier. It's just amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
Judy? You got to unmute yourself, Judy.
Yes, wonderful meditation, very focused. Michelle, we really appreciate what you had to say, especially I was interested in what you said about children. Now, I haven't been around children very much, but I understand, especially under 5, that children not only are still very close to their own souls that have not been corrupted yet, but they can also see into the elemental world. I've been studying this recently with Goethe's poem Der Erlkönig, where a little boy is clearly seeing elementals and is fearful of them, and his father does not understand. They're on a horse late at night. I mean, it's a very profound piece of music that was set to music by Schubert, and Madame Blavatsky is said to have played it in a drawing room. Very profound. So what I'm wondering is, can we possibly understand in the child state, which certainly does not mean childish, a state that is very prone to the lower kingdom, the elemental kingdom, to be vulnerable to that, and yet also to be so very pure in soul that they have much to teach us. And that's why there's probably that famous saying of Jesus of Nazareth, suffer little children to come unto me. And it doesn't have anything to do with being childish. And I was wondering if you think that about children, if you could say more about that.
I definitely think that children are they're just naturally open. And they have a very potent imagination as well. I would not be surprised at all if many children, see into the elemental kingdoms. But I do think that, under 7 years old or so, that a child really isn't responsible in the same way, and is more closely protected by their higher self. But I remember being a child, and I was very fearless in certain ways, but I would also get very terrified of things like the dark and things like that. So I think, there are certain qualities about being a child we leave behind, but what is the essence that we should be bringing into adulthood is that curiosity, the wonder, just to be open to other people. I mean, we're so closed off. Very often we don't even want to look at each other in the eye because it's too intimate almost. And when we do look at people in the eye, and there's a real connection, there's almost a surprise with it, greeting people in that way. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Joe?
Show Douglas.
Joe?
Yeah.
Unmuting here. Thank you, Michelle. I was interested in that part where you were speaking about the way children are taught to love, but love being this divisive quality that, your tribe is different than another tribe. Your friends are different than your enemies. Your family is different than other families. And I was wondering if in some sense, your whole talk is about the re-education of love, of rising above love as a divisive, quality that consolidates the identity and splits it off and becomes something as limitless as what you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think pure higher love is can't really be tainted. It's our mind that will fragment it and bring it into this all of this division that we see in the world. And it's I don't think that can be stressed too much. Like in the Voice of the Silence, it talks about the mind is the great slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer. So we want to cultivate when we draw our mind away from these barriers that we have, just suspending them. I mean, we don't necessarily have to believe them all the time, but just by experiments, we can suspend our beliefs that we have, just going about our day. And I think the more and more we do that, the more and more it's training the mind to be looking towards the higher, to be looking towards opportunity rather than limitation. Because it just really struck me that that statement from Mahatma M, that it's our mental perversity, that it's all in the mind. To think that there's no evil outside of oneself is so profound, and that it's a choice. We choose to see it. It's very freeing in a way because it's not outside of our control. It's something that we can choose to do. And even if it's not perfect, we can still attempt and move in that direction.
Joba?
Yeah, Michelle, it was beautiful. I just loved your calm and wonderful way in which you presented everything. But I want to go back to the question of the gunas that Monica brought up. I'm very interested to understand your idea of when you were talking about sattva, especially when you said that you're still in the forest. What does that symbolism mean? What does the forest mean?
Well,
Being in the
those
forest.
weren't my words.
I know.
But I think that can be applied in a lot of ways. Almost like the edge of the forest can be the edge of the mind, and moving beyond mind into a state of unknown. And that we're something I thought of recently is that we're just so terrified of the light. We're so, which it seems so strange, but I don't know what it is like for other people, but if you there's a statement in the Light on the Path that I've been thinking about for the last month and a half or so, and it's seek in the heart for the source of evil, and that I think what I kind of stopped at was this idea of our own goodness. That yes, it's a result of ignorance. It's all on the plane of the mind. That evil only exists in humanity, but it's just a mental distinction, I think, because, like I said, when we view ourselves, even in good terms, oh, I'm doing this for the sake of other human beings. It's creating another self. You're forsaking one personal self for a spiritual personal self, and it can just create another barrier to get past, and it can be more subtle even. And so I think it's a helpful exercise, even though it might seem a little strange, to look at where you see evil, where you are seeing that, and seeing it within yourself, and it almost neutralizing it in a way, and seeing that you're really no different, and I think that might be able to help, I guess, help us get beyond that, our own goodness.
Thank you, Michelle.
Diane?
You gotta unmute yourself, Diane. Diane, why don't you keep working on unmuting yourself, and then
Okay, can you hear me now?
you are here.
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. I can't imagine anyone doing a better job than you did with that subject. You are incarnated almost into that subject. And basically what I wanted to say was that I think one of the senses we haven't developed yet, I think, is this sense of understanding. And to me, that means not thinking about oneself first, but putting yourself in the position of another first. And that way, it seems that we can experience brotherhood without the egotism of. That's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's an article in Hermes, and there's a statement that was written in there that just really struck me, that said one can't get closer to Krishna by trying to understand Krishna. You understand Krishna through other beings, and I think that is a really difficult thing, and it's almost like all of our struggles that we do go through. It's almost a way of developing that discernment and understanding, that compassion and empathy, because anyone who's really gone through any kind of suffering, they can see that within another human being. And I don't know what it is for all of you, but the people in my life that helped me the most, I could see that they had gone through, and there was a recognition and understanding, and that's really what helped me pull through, and And I don't know if that answered your question.
I was wondering, Michelle, in a class, in a Gita class recently, you really wanted to drill down on this idea of working for and as the self, but that kind of understanding the self, which I think
Mm-hmm.
ties in with Diane's question,
Hmm.
makes the potency of working for and as the self real. And then I'm going to make this question more complicated. Would that have anything to do with where you were working with the idea of meditation before brotherhood?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's
Yeah,
pretty.
I can't remember exactly the statement. It was see, is it see the self
Mhm.
in all, and then work as the self of something like that.
Because in Crosby's commentary
Yes,
of the Gita.
yes. But at least the connection that I made with it was that basically what you said about meditation before brotherhood, which seems a little strange. But I think that you know, if you don't know who you are, if you don't know the self, how can you work for the self of all? Or how can you really have any potency to actually be of help? I mean, there are little ways that you can, and I'm not in any way degrading any effort that someone makes at all. But I think that I think it may be about, being able to bring consciousness to a point. And this kind of mirrors cosmogenesis as well. So if we can bring the consciousness to a point, then we can, I guess, think more effectively. We can magnetize our thoughts and connect to, use the imagination in a creative, healthy way, where we can link up to these, noetic ideas that are there in the Akasha, that great beings are, Mahatmas are sustaining this current that is beyond time. And the more that we can focus and link up to that with precision and concentration, I think the more beneficial we can really be, and actually embody brotherhood.
Yeah, HPB in an article, Let Every Man Prove His Own Work. It's a really long article. And the first half of the article is basically talking about that a lot of our attempts to be helpful to others just don't work out. It's just us running around being busybodies, making a mess of everything. And in HPB's, style of saying things. But then she really talks about how it really requires self-knowledge. And you've really got to get, if you really want to help people, you need wisdom. Wisdom and compassion need to kind of be twins somehow. So that's my recollection of that article. And
yeah. That reminds me of a little saying: most of the evil happens in the world from the good people. People that are just trying to do some good, and but it's not focused. It's not really deliberate and noetically thought through. And so, it can kind of create this whole turba in their wake, even unconsciously.
you want to look at the chat? Looks like Kim has offered something from Galatians chapter 6, verse 4. But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. I don't understand that. Do you understand that?
A little. I don't claim to. You know,
Maybe.
I'd probably have to sit with that for another month and a half.
Uh-huh.
And
Maybe Kim could jump in there and say what it is.
here's Kim.
Oh, well, I just thought I'd look up the source of HPB's quote, you know. But I mean, rejoicing in himself, rejoicing in himself alone. It's like, well, like, you know, the recognition of any kind of wisdom comes from a correspondence within. One has to understand first before one recognizes the truth outside. And so rejoicing in the truth within oneself through meditation happens first, and then one is porous to the light that others bring also. So it's not like you can't rejoice in another, but I think it's saying it comes from your own understanding of truth first. It's the best I can tell.
Yeah.
That's very
Thank
helpful.
you. Yeah.
We have Percy has a hand up.
Yeah, hi. So that was a really wonderful talk. Thank you. It gives me a better sense of Bodhi and Bodhichitta. The question I had was coming back to the three gunas, especially the sattva. And I can't remember the exact words, but to the extent, it was something to the extent of sattva takes you to the edge of the forest, but doesn't want you to go beyond. And in some sense, it was a thief. So I was just kind of wondering, how do we view sattva, given that in our current state, that humanity is, you know, the fifth sub-race, that sattva is a guna that could be the one that we would want to try to focus our attention on to the exclusion of the other two. So I was kind of curious about that analogy of sattva in the forest and not wanting us to go beyond. How do we interpret that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's saying that sattva doesn't understand. It's afraid of what is outside of the forest because it's unknown. And it's like clothing oneself in all of the good qualities, and then, you know, kind of like a miser, just holding on to all of his wealth, kind of in that sense. And that's definitely reflected in the world today, quite a lot. And, you know, it's a really pretty prevalent in the political arena, or at least on news stations, I think. You know, there's different groups of people that really believe that they are right. And it's almost like we need our enemies to validate our own sanity and our own idea of being right and good. And so I think that by turning away from it, there's just the fact that one is able to see it, kind of supposes that there's a point beyond the three, that there's someone witnessing, or there's something that's witnessing that. And that is a big step, because if one isn't seeing it, if light isn't being shed on the dark parts, then how will we ever think to get beyond them? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure.
Do you have any other thoughts?
No, that's a good perspective. Certainly, we want to take the position of the observer. And from that point of view, all of the three gunas are what we observe and not get attached to or involved with. And I just see where you, when you brought the analogies of people thinking they're doing good, but more so turns out to be more selfish kind of good. So in a sense, maybe we might think that rajas is being mistaken for sattva because it's being looked through the lens of selfishness and self motive. Do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Thank
you. That was helpful.
I had a follow-through question on that, if I
Yes.
could. Oh, did you have something that you wanted to say about that, Michelle?
I did, but it's gone.
And then I start talking and then you forgot? Oh, okay.
It's okay.
That happens. Okay. Well, my question.
Not all my ideas are that great, so.
Oh, okay. My question has to do with, I think I'm wondering, see the series, right, is called the Aquarian series, and we're kind of, it's an opportunity to kind of, through the theosophical lens, re-educate love, re-educate our feelings about everything, about compassion, re-educate our feelings about wisdom, everything. And we're hearing from all from each other in that way, in so many different voices and perspectives. And it occurs to me that transcending the three gunas, it seems pretty Aquarian. In other words, the Aquarian, at least in some of the Hermes articles, indicates kind of a vertical perspective. And as Percy mentioned, you've got to be able to look at all three. And I almost thought of being vertically above them, rise above them. I think he even said that, in order to see all three. So you're not confused about which one is Rajas and Sattva and all that, right? But then being able to rise above Sattva even. And the other thing about more the Piscean age, and I'm being kind of crude about this, but there's the idea of personal salvation. And the personal salvation at a certain level, you could say, well, that's kind of, it's either the limitation of Sattva or a misunderstanding of Sattva or something like that. Whereas in the Aquarian age, at least from what I've been able to see from a lot of people, is, it's not really what, at least younger people, I think so. They're not really into what religion you're into. They almost don't really care. But they seem to have, well, people are people, so I'm not going to say anything about a group of people. But there just seems to be more of an idea of less about personal salvation and more about brotherhood. But maybe that's not your observation. So.
Wow. That the Aquarian age is more about brotherhood?
Yeah, and more philosophical and less about personal salvation. But we're barely into the Aquarian age, so it's not like we're...
Yeah, but you can already see the effects of it. I mean, it's already well into its second degree, and you can see the effects of it already. I mean, everything's very quickened now. For a while, a lot of the wars were just taking place in a mental way rather than kind of on the physical plane. We can now, we're having a meeting right now. We're connecting all of these different groups through this computer, and it's instant. And so in that sense, we're a lot more connected to more people than we probably ever would have been in the Piscean age. And it's like everything's really tightened and sped up. And I see, at least now, yes, there is a greater push towards brotherhood. But the opposite sign of Aquarius is Leo, and that's about individuality. It's kind of a me thing. And there's a higher aspect to that. But I think as the age of Aquarius unfolds, it's going to be a more well-rounded view of what brotherhood means. Not this everybody needs to be the same, or everyone needs to be living in the same way, which is kind of being put out there currently, as though that certain idea, I guess, freedom of thought is kind of being attacked at the moment. I mean, it's just not okay at the moment to really speak your mind in the same way. And I think eventually it will be this kind of pure expression of the individuality, the true individuality, not this lower reflection of it, but this true individuality of the higher self amongst the group. And I think that's really what Aquarius represents.
Thank you very much.
Bill?
Yeah, we're technically out of time, but let's take one more question. Is that okay, Michelle?
Mm-hmm.
Is that me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I too was struck by that idea of meditation before brotherhood, and I guess it made me think that we as human beings try to have joining or sharing or community based on all kinds of external features, based on common belief or trade or income level or all kinds of things. But of fellowship or sharing based on Bodhi, that it just struck me afresh that no wonder the Theosophical movement has been aiming for a nucleus of universal brotherhood, because if we can join together based on our deepest convictions and our most lofty self-conceptions, how much stronger that is than any external feature that we circumstantially join together out of mutual self-interest. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
thank you for leading to that thought.
I had the thought that how in Theosophy the microcosm seems to mirror the macrocosm, and there's so many different ways that we can apply that analogy. And I think that when we can really perfect a one-on-one relationship, or even relationships within a smaller group, it's like mirroring the whole. And so if we can have that in a small theosophical group, what does that do to the rest of the world? I don't know, but there's all these different ways that if we can think in that way and unite in the mind, which is completely unseen and hidden, amongst all these differences and kind of different vibrations that people have, there can be kind of a symphony that can happen. And what does that do? I'm not really sure, but it's just a thought. How can that mirror into the rest of the world?
Just magnificent. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. And
thank you all for being here.